Solid.
Turn it on live. It's going to take a little bit for it to catch up. Are you on YouTube? Okay. Tell us when it turns on. We'll get it sorted.
Don't mind me just passing the time. Can you guys hear me on the stream? Okay, we're going to start in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
So whenever you want to go.
Keep an eye on the Twitter. At some point, if I say something like, hey, you're welcome to submit questions over Twitter.
Yeah, I like AMAs.
Obviously, we're not in a rush to begin, so just give another minute and we'll get started. I know what it is at conventions to, be going between different talks, take some time. People want to smoke weed between talks. 2 minutes. Show me. I want to know. I don't have a mirror. Oh, hey.
That's live right now.
Because we're on Wi-Fi. We'll see. Okay. All righty. Well, I think that's enough time waiting. Thank you guys for coming out. I'm Sheldon Deere, Technical Lead at Octopus Network, and I am not a developer, but I'm still going to teach you how you can build an app chain on your own this week without breaking too much of a sweat. The majority of us here are, a little bit more focused on EVM. I think it is called ETH Denver after all. So, appropriate level of bias there. We are a substrate-based organization. That's really where our anchor is. But we recognize the need for EVM. We recognize the need for IBC and all kinds of other things that we work with. So, Octopus Network has its tentacles in a lot of different protocols and components. So we're going to try to cover as many of them as we can. This is not an all-inclusive talk, and I want to be really clear here that Parity Inc. being at this event means that we are not here to teach substrate, right? So I'll stop leaning into the mic, but we are not here to teach substrate. That's Parity Inc.'s job. We use substrate 9.13 right now. It's a stable version. So we're very happy to be improving on that with our pallets. The fix for Octopus Network is not to say destroy the other substrate entities. It is to participate with them, to cohabitate with them. So we'll get more into that in a minute. I might as well introduce myself. Like I said, I'm not a developer. I'm more of a reverse engineer, security engineer. I've been in IT for about 15 years. I've been in crypto for about 7 or 8. Octopus Network is the first organization I was comfortable enough to join as a representative. I only have my smug mug on one other company's website. So very, very happy with this protocol. Excellent concepts. I'm not just an employee, I'm a fan, right? So thank you guys. So just to be really clear here, I'm giving you the perspective from an idiot who can't yet put up his own app chain, but I'm working on it himself. So that's the positioning that I come to, is like, I understand most people in this room have also not built their own substrate blockchain before. Same place, right? Same positioning. So what is Octopus Network? A lot of people mistake us for a direct Cosmos competitor or a direct Polkadot competitor. We fit in the multi-chain space in a different way. I'll show you a diagram to describe that in just a moment. But we typically couldn't exist without our competition, and we're partnered with them. So it's a little bit unusual market positioning. AVAX is dependent on ETH. They are partnered with them, but also their subnets run differently. They have different features. There's different things they want to brag about. Of course, they have to catch up on EIP 5059 and all kinds of other things. But bottom line, it's a different kind of relationship for us because our competition wants us to succeed. We provide benefits for them. We're well known in the industry as a bridge building team. We come from CDOT, the research organization, and that just means that we have a lot of different variety and benefits to offer for multi-chain systems, right? So you can run around doing hash time lock contracts all the time. That's not really an adequate solution. We're really well known for bridge building, and we are doing that out in production. So more on that stuff later. The important thing to understand in that, us being both partnered and seemingly competitive with other multi-chain ecosystems is that they need us and we need them. There is a marketplace where all of these concepts, show up to be competitive and are useful. And our purpose is not to necessarily select the best of the best. Our purpose is to enable everyone to the best of our ability. So we're very, I guess you could say, flat hierarchy in that regard. Our organization reflects that. But also the way we treat bias is very honest in that we want merit good projects to succeed. And that means that we do everything we can to support them, usually through our ongoing work. So more about that coming up. It's obviously built on substrate. That's kind of the point. So I am ticking through slides, but you don't see them. I forgot, and I was warned about this. Here we go. Okay, sure. Okay. So the most important thing to understand when you're looking at Octopus Network as a multi-chain network concept is the way we treat components of that network. There's compute logic, there's bridging, there's different resource allocations that our team will talk about more this week that are sort of economically novel. The whole point of us planning the way that we to make substrate as fair as possible and make it available for everyone. So in doing that, we've created a concept where, okay, so you see the outside bubble here is near. That's because our protocol is on their smart contracts. So that's our immediate benefit, is that we don't need to buy on-chain on the blockchains that we are helping propagate, because that's unnecessary risk for them, right? So if you guys have seen any DeFi project start up with a pretty significant TVL, it has, ups and downs. It has benefits and drawbacks, right? So instead of trying to amass large amounts of money, we're trying to amass large amounts of value. We do that by judging app chain concepts based on merit. So once you get through where is it? Oh, okay, I'm gonna stop trying to use that screen because I can't see the damn thing. If what I'm showing you, see that we have app chain assets and the Octopus relay set below. The relay really is the founding infrastructural principle that you need to understand when you're working on an app chain concept or when you're looking to interact with us on Near Protocol. It's that the app chain assets that we are helping spawn, they are both native to Near Protocol and to their own blockchains, right? So we glue that together. That's the purpose of our work, is to make sure you can pop out your own substrate blockchain and then immediately have Near DeFi available to you and all kinds of other tools from Rust that are just wonderful and excellent. So the principle of having these value systems be separated from DeFi means that we can manage risk in a way that's much more sustainable. So any business that pops up here as an app, their risk posture is different from DeFi. They still want to participate in DeFi. They're anchored to it. They don't have to directly take on the responsibility for millions of dollars in TVL and a pissed off community and all kinds of things that we are seeing today if we're paying attention on Twitter to frogs and all kind of stuff. So again, to revisit sort of the infrastructural difference between these three, it's very important to note not so much which line connects where, but why. So with Polkadot's relay, you are expected to utilize Polkadot's materials to communicate with other parachains, right? So that's XCMP. We do not use XCMP. That's not part of our protocol. It's not part of our ecosystem. Polkadot does that in a way that's very high throughput, and it's excellent that it can have that sort of middleman that is fair and that helps run their ecosystem. But we took the middleman out of that, so we do not have a direct relayer economy. If you need to relay between app chains, you have IBC out of the box to work on. That is still in draft, just to be transparent. That's inter-blockchain communication. So the idea is that your substrate chain out of the box doesn't need to communicate with another piece of substrate infrastructure. It just needs to communicate directly with another app chain that agrees on the metadata of your token. So we'll get into more of how IBC works a little bit later, but that's the important differentiator for Polkadot, is because Polkadot effectively has you could argue it's a centralized dependency or whatever, but it has a need to use that relayer network, right? So Cosmos is different than that. Cosmos lives on hubs and zones. There's economic anchors, there's protocol anchors. You can use different components of the SDK that they provide. Super useful, really great concept for multi-chain network. They also are a little bit more oriented on the sort of relay concept that you leave your blockchain to touch another piece of infrastructure, and then you use that to reach partner blockchains of the ecosystem that have a similar consensus mechanism to you, right? So if you're running BFT, you're not going to talk directly to somebody else for BFT. You reach them through a zone, you interact with them on Gravity DEX, you make partnerships to that sort of thing. So there's that intermediary layer of hubs and zones for Cosmos. We also don't have that and don't do that. So comparing again for the last time on this diagram, the main logic is that we're providing services that are effectively centralized, but they benefit each independent blockchain that is joining the network. So by getting those benefits, they can immediately go for distribution, right? So immediately their economy is distributed over Near Protocol and over their own chain. And that's just a very easy place to start on IDO, where you have us as kind of non-biased third party helping to make sure that your community gets the tools they need, are able to pop up the validators that they need to run the network, and just in general have a well-running substrate protocol. There's an economic device that comes out of this, and that's staking rates. So we can talk more about the economy later, and a lot of my colleagues are going to focus more on the economic aspects of our protocol. But it's important to understand that we basically have a lower ceiling of capacity, so a much higher level of scalability. What does that mean for an economy? It means that today, while there are only 2 app chains, we frequently get complaints from people in the ecosystem, investors, that some of the rates for app chains are low. This is true because there are so few app chains. So by having more app chains, you end up with this dynamic where speculators move from app chain to app chain. And of course, that means that rates are going to get better. When there's too many people in one pool, there's not enough tokens pre-allocated to pay them out well, the rate goes down, et cetera. So there's always this back and forth pull of speculation, price, and then of course, a 28-day unfreeze period that, you got to really take it seriously if you're moving between validators. And just to touch on ETH briefly, we can talk more about this a little bit later on in the talk. We're at ETH Denver, so paying homage to very critical layer 1 platform. We do have Oct on Ethereum. Oct was initially deployed, the full supply on Ethereum on purpose for transparency's sake. You'll notice it was through a deployer that was out. All 100 million tokens have been issued through that contract. So for anyone who's like an Etherscan sleuth, you're welcome to come us out. No funny business. It's easier that way. Just, hey, here's the trust element. Just deploy everything on Ethereum and then go from there. The reason that works so well for us is because of our partnership with the Aurora team. They built the Rainbow Bridge. That's a very effective way to get from Ethereum back to Near protocol. So you're welcome to look at audits for that stuff. You can poke my brain about it. Whoever's watching the live stream, please feel free to sleuth on Etherscan and ask questions in the community. We love stuff like that. It helps us stay transparent and show you guys what we're doing with those files. And some people say the allocation is confusing. I don't think so. But then again, I've also explained it on Twitter a whole bunch of times. So let's keep moving. I need to go through. Okay. Okay, so one of our headlines is where Web3 happens. How does that work? Well, I'll tell you up front, a lot of this is just not my end. It's not my responsibility. I'm not going to go into detail on these things. I'm just telling you guys it exists in case this is the one Octopus Network talk that you attend ETH Denver. So things to know, accelerator, not incubator. We don't demand equity. We don't force accelerator projects to launch on our platform. You must. No, it's like, hey, we're here to help you guys. We want good concepts built. We're here to support. So accelerator, to be clear about that. Also, because we have so many venture capital organizations that were interested in our offering initially and want to participate in the ecosystem, it's just easier for us to help protocols sort of communicate with them in a group. So that isn't formalized yet, but right now that's going to, it's targeted to be the Octopus Venture DAO, where VCs who invested with us and with app chains will be interesting to consider what else we audit and sort of give our stamp of approval of, like, hey, what else is good? Should we invest in this, etc. So that's part of our value there. Octopus DAO is delayed. It was on the roadmap, which we've just recently modified, but we're still very happy that we're going to be turning over some major controls about the details and numbers of the infrastructure to the market in the next 6 to 18 months. Our roadmap was just recently reflected to update that information. So I'm very excited to announce that that's going to be a Sputnik DAO. We'll have more information on that going forward. That's a DAO system on Near protocol where you incentivize rewards for good proposals. So that's in the pipeline, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that. There's Octopus Guild, who is partially run by our peer and excellent supporter, Pandu, Miss Decentricity herself. She was here earlier to support, but she's a very busy woman. So that is a really excellent player in the blockchain space who has helped our first two app chains get going. So right now she's helping run Octopus Guild, but it is a much larger vision of a community for the app chains themselves. It's not that Myriad and DeBio can't today just have a chat themselves. Of course they can, but we want to encourage community for those app chains that is sort of, let's say, out of the purview of the public. Right? If you want to have a private discussion about a potential partnership, that shouldn't have to happen in somebody's Telegram channel with a bunch of, oh yeah, please partner. We all know what Telegram channels look like. Moving along, the Octopus Council will be an organization installed by the Octopus DAO. Their responsibility is to nominate the task force. Like I said, we've got an update to the roadmap sort of in progress right now. We had to move some sprints around. But the main thing to know about the Octopus Council is that it's a relatively limited group of individuals. You have to hold 1 million Oct tokens to be on the council. So we're kind of not there yet, right? It's a young economy. Not very many holders have 1 million. the point of that is that it can't be activated until there are enough different, people holding 1 million. So there has to be, I believe, a minimum of 28 members, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check the numbers, but that's not going to be fully functional until there is a minimum level of distribution of power among those voters. So the council's responsibility. The task force is responsible for nominating auditors and mechanics of the ecosystem. And that audit is obviously very important to us. So that's our next line item of how we make Web3 happen. Anybody can support smart contracts, can run a grants program. Anybody can just sort of do a due diligence move partnership and then just say, oh, you're ready to go. We don't want to do that. Our intention is more to focus on our value that the team is known for in the industry, and that's basically saying in the audit process that we're responsible for feasibility, for economic fairness, and for innovation. So the things that we audit, we audit them pretty toughly. Really important component, Octoders will always have voting power. We take steps on a regular basis to make sure that no one holding our governance token is sort of stamped out of a vote. If the Oct token can't be used to vote at low levels for your favorite protocol, then how useful is it really, right? I think we all know that governance tokens have to have different sort of like shelves of where participation can be, but we want to make sure that everyone has a shelf. If you have one Oct token and you're like, I have 1 share, I'm voting with my 1 share, we support that. We want you to stick around. So we're obviously allowing 1 share to be delegated today because it's economically frugal or reasonable, but we're looking at components like that for the long term. And by the way, I spawned this in community on my own. We've had a few people interested so far. If you are an Oct holder of less than 500 and you want to pool up your assets with somebody else and validator instead of pooling up to delegate, please join our Discord. Ask me about that. I'm the only Sheldon at Octopus Network. You can tag me. Bottom line, if the community wants to run a validator itself, it only makes sense that we support that and help you guys do that. So I can definitely help an interested group of individuals run a validator. The main question there is agreeing which app chain to run that validator for, and some components like that. So that would probably be a small Sputnik down, but we need the Oct tokens to make that worthwhile to start. I think we're around 200-300 right now. We need 10,000. So the last component, how do we make Web3 happen? Minimize unnecessary risk and loss. I can tell you that I do this myself mechanically because I'm one of the people doing tech support for the community. If you broke your keys at the validator level, if you lost something critical short of a mnemonic that controls your NEAR account, we'll do everything we can to get you restored. Some people who are coming from Ethereum aren't really expecting how NEAR protocol is going to function. So just to be transparent, hear me on this. Your protocol has multiple private keys. You will reissue private keys. You will rotate private keys. You will delete private keys. It's normal, but at the same time, it can cause problems every now and then. So for that, we're always making sure to support the community. Things get a little confusing. Oh, whoops, I rotated my keys. Okay, well, just go reinsert the old key. No problem. So we take that very seriously from a support aspect that nobody who fucks up should have to lose their Oct. That's the way we go about it. Anyone take lose their neck, sorry, but otherwise we're here to protect the community. So let me click over to the next slide. Okay, so here's a series of questions that are probably helpful for some of y'all that are on EVM saying, why do I want to learn a whole new stack? Why do I want to deal with all this Rust, blah, blah, why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Important basis is you need your own economy. That's probably the first one that comes to mind because you're always dependent on a layer one's economy if you build on a layer one. We have isolation from NEAR economically. So yes, your economy could still be affected by NEAR, but it's almost non-existent. With ETH, your relationship is very direct. You have gas fees to worry about. You have different components to worry about for updates. It's a little different for us, right? So you need your own economy. Yes, obviously you need your own blockchain. I'm concerned about gas fees over time. Okay, well, that's natural for every layer one. Every layer one has its moment to figure out scaling. NEAR has programmed this very well. If you look on their website, I can direct you to some materials that tell you what the price of gas is going to be based on transaction volume for that 24-hour period. That's a relatively scalable approach, but also you don't want to be victim to that, right? You want your own economy. If that means you're building your own economy, you shouldn't have to worry about somebody else's gas schema, right? I want high performance at a low cost. You need dedicated infrastructure, just straight up. We build application-specific blockchains. We help people build application-specific blockchains. Our goal is not to make the fastest thing ever, but if you literally want to compete with Solana on proof of history, then you set your hardware requirements high, and maybe an FPGAs are required or something crazy. I don't know what. You can talk to me about fun solutions. I love weird hardware solutions. So there's high performance you can get out of the box if you do nothing and don't attempt any sort of memory restrictions or performance improvements. You're looking at 100 TPS out of the box without trying. If you refine and clean that up, go through audit, make things a little bit more efficient at the runtime level, you're looking at 1,000 TPS. So that's really appealing for different people who need high-speed trading and different components that are tough to deal with on ETH if you're just timing things with rollups. Not that that can't be done, but it takes a level of pacing with those rollups that isn't always beneficial. I need accessible DeFi, but I don't want to maintain DeFi grade risk. We covered this a little bit already. I won't beat a dead horse. It's very straightforward that DeFi is great, and we had big old DeFi summer a couple years ago. The excitement has worn off a little bit. The SEC is starting to bonk people on the head about this stuff. So it's much easier to be an extra legal Web3 business when you don't have billions of dollars locked away, when you don't have a question about sourcing of funds. There's all kinds of de-risking that can be done, right? So I want to participate in an ecosystem with composability. Yes, that can be smart contracts. I recognize the sort of, punch that I'm drinking here, saying that composability is something that we offer. Well, that's Substrate for you. Substrate has a lot of flexibility with runtimes. You can package different runtimes together. Ethereum is a very wide, opportunity and solidity. That's great, but the way composability works is a little bit different, and getting different smart contracts to cooperate together is a giant pain in the ass. I'm sure we all know somebody who's tried to put two smart contracts together and had a small aneurysm. I need some interoperability, but don't want to build and maintain. That's just straightforward, right? Everybody likes bridging. Everybody likes having access to more economies that are, not directly their responsibility. Everybody likes more TVL, being able to move in and out. Just relatively straightforward that interoperability is useful, especially when you're going through different ecosystems, which we help with. It's our specific focus. I want to use software components that are increasing in popularity. So a lot of people see Polkadot and say, oh, that's great. Okay, well, that's what's happening over there. There is a pretty significant story that is missed in the ecosystem that's part of our market positioning. So there are tons of substrate projects out there that build their own Polkadot. They build their own sort of Kusama. They don't need a relay network to operate. Saito is probably my personal favorite of these examples, a really excellent gaming platform. There's a lot happening in the substrate ecosystem that is not, that is not Polkadot. So, don't get the wrong idea. There's plenty to do. It's not just between the three of us, Octopus, Kusama, and Polkadot. We are the sort of major players, but that doesn't mean that there are not lots of excellent smaller ecosystems out there where people are looking for work, where there's contracts and grants to be had. So there is a little bit more going on with Substrate than people notice, because it's all kind of, ad focused on Polkadot and Kusama. That's the logos that we're all used to seeing, right? I need to integrate off-chain components without an oracle or non-stakeholder third party. This is one of my favorites. So anchoring shit off-chain is always a pain, right? You have an Ethereum contract. You need to get some information from the outside. You have to trust that person who's providing your data from the outside to not punk you, to not get poisoned on their sources, to not all just like, oh, hey, we're distributed. Turns out it's just, three people watching the same API, providing that back to you as a feed. There's all kinds of weird things that can happen when you get into oracles and trust modeling. So one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit, which again, we're not here to teach because we're not Parity Inc., is off-chain workers. So that's a really different solution to Ethereum that is incredibly useful. And we'll get more into that later. But again, why do you want to build an app chain? Because you need ad hoc resources that are not easy to trust, but you need to be able to trust them as part of your economy without having to necessarily pay them extra, find a different payment scheme for them. you have to be able to include them in the economy without just like, hey, we're a Web 2 business, we're paying you for services, right? That doesn't fly. I want to interact or serve with other protocols in a larger community. So that's one that I get a lot also, is people come to us and say, hey, you guys are the bridge builders, we want to build bridges. Like, okay, that's awesome. There's definitely components of Substrate that make that easy, like the BP module. You can, combine a lot of different runtimes together and do different things with that. We'll get into the modules for that later. But the component of, Dot, Polkadot, Kusama, it's always that we're in a network together, right? Hey, I can, easily make a partnership with you because we have this relationship with Dot, Kusama, whoever. It's a community, right? I'm not going to get into the social aspect of that. My colleagues will dig into that later. It's pretty simple. Getting plugged into a community up front means we're already there, already looking for, oh, hey, what's the new app chain that's coming on? So different level of reception from, oh, there's some new dApp that just popped on ETH. There aren't communities that, respond to new dApps on ETH, but having a pre-existing community that's based on the blockchains themselves, there's already these existing ad hoc economies grouped together that are interested to know, hey, you're bringing us a concept. What is it? Why should we care? I want a fair launch beginning of my project. So this is a really critical one. I don't know how many people in here have launched their own project. I'm not going to ask you to raise hands because that's a little embarrassing for some of us, I think. I know it's embarrassing for me at least because I've written 2 white papers and launched them because I just don't have the time or patience. But hopefully I'll turn one of them into an app chain and launch that. It's a charity concept. So bottom line, I would only be able to do that through Octopus because every other way to do that would require a relationship with venture capital who is willing to lose their money. My posture for that before as a charity organization was, hey, you're basically going to get to write this off. Your investment in us is a donation. That's the value prop. You can ride with us or not. The majority of organizations are not interested in that. Venture capital as a donation. I hear myself. It sounds stupid, right? It doesn't make sense. So I know that that's not possible, but I do know that if I were to launch my concept with Octopus Network, that I could manage relationships with venture capital, that I could have a chance to talk to the venture DAO, that I could look for different investors that we have relationships with, even if they haven't invested with us directly. There's a lot of investors who communicate with us on a regular basis and say, hey, can I get some tokens? Can I work with you guys? Is there a funding round coming up? We're not taking any more funding rounds. We're trying to disconnect from Web 2 and Web 2 funds, right? So all of these things lead together to a posture of we will help you fair launch. The community will own the majority of the concept. The part that the community doesn't own goes into a treasury that we help you manage transparently. And obviously that's part of the economic audit I've been running my mouth about, is that you have to be able to pay validators. The network that you spawn, it has to be able to sustain itself for an extended period of time to be viable. So there's a lot that I've rattled through in a very short period of time. And this is not an AMA, but at the same time, it's a relatively small audience. None of you look like you're going to bite my head off. Anybody want to ask anything while we're jumping through some of the more layman stuff about Octopus? Anyone? Question?
Start an action without wanting to go through the acceleration process. I just want to scale like that.
So for the stream, the question is, can I start an app chain without going through the accelerator program? The answer is absolutely yes. You're welcome to contact me offline and I'll help you with that. The logic is simple that we, basically open source our toolkit. There's a level of it that's like, hey, watch out, open source, but under construction, right? But yeah, there's a process that we encourage for partnerships and relationships. But if you said nothing and just plugged in a testnet and then plugged into mainnet, I would be lighting you up like, dude, who are you? Want to work with us? We got to help you promote and stuff. So yes, you can absolutely launch an app chain without human interaction, without venture capital, without a need to go, there's no advanced blessing from us. We'll happily give you enablement and then, you're free to play around and we support the heck out of that. So excellent question. Thank you for that. I think we're going to keep moving. There's plenty of time for more things and more questions. We're supposed to be running my mouth for another, 90 minutes. Okay. So let me just stop for a second. Okay. So let's get into some planning principles that might be useful if you're considering an app chain. see. Okay. Okay, so this is a little bit on the meta thought leader, a little try hardy, just like, hey, these are things you can do as a person to communicate with other people about the viability of your concept, the sustainability of your concept. You basically need other people to buy in, right? When we launch Web2 businesses, we do something really cool. We know there's a market value. We get money. We go out there, we get more money. Whoop-de-doo, great business, right? Web3 is a little bit different. We need relationships. We need stakeholders. We need people to, be invested almost moralistically with our concept, right? So the idea of planning in depth in this way is that you know that everyone in your economy is going to be a stakeholder of some type, right? So if you work backwards, that's probably the easiest way to go. I could say that you could argue that components of DeFi are like a gray box where you have to check like, oh, okay, is this the same project that I deposited my funds into? Or, here, this other deployer has been changed, or, the contract, the customer. But really help with, because Substrate is confusing. Rust is a little bit of an adjustment for people who aren't used to that type of language. I personally prefer it over Java, but I've also been Java and pulling my hair for 10 years. So coming back to the layman stuff I said we're going to talk about, consider the participants required from different holders, consider incentives and disincentives. This is probably the first checkpoint of how am I going to get people to play along is, okay, I want someone to want to participate, and then I want someone to not want to participate in a malicious way or to only participate in a productive way. I have to think this out for you. I think you guys get the idea. The planning of it is just a simple, okay, I know what this stakeholder is going to want. I know what they'll care about. Then I can assume that they're going to be mad about this staking rate, or they'll be happy with this benefit, or whatever. So it's just planning ahead to anticipate some, let's say, fickleness there, right? Plan allocations for participation, infrastructure change, and moderation. This is an easy thing. I'm pretty sure we all know this. Plan your allocation, right? If you're starting a new token and you debase your asset like crazy, you're going to wonder why. There has to be a reason, right? So we're not willing to debase Oct. We get a lot of requests for single-sided staking. People want to put down the governance and then get more governance token back. We don't have the economics to support that. So that's components where we can support our app chains doing something similar, where they have multiple token economy. You stake your governance token, and then you get your Froggy token. You stake your Froggy token, and you get your Pickles token. Like, no problem. We support our app chains doing that. In order for them to be able and free to do that, we let them anchor to our economy. And we'll talk about least root stake a little bit more going forward, but it's really just a TVL economic anchor. Be sure decisions are centralized enough, but not too much. Isn't that the opposite of what we're doing here? Why did I write that? It's really simple. In order to come to a conclusion, in order to come to a decisive, hey, we're taking this action, you need some sort of resolute action. So that means that you need distribution for the community, but also you need, hey, this is going to be a firm action. This is not, oh, hey, we all voted, and now Daniel the Frog says he's going to airdrop 7 to everybody. Like, that's not productive. It's an overly centralized decision that doesn't necessarily meet the expectation, needs, or really want out of that whole. Keep referencing that one because it's been all over my feeds for the past week. It's kind of funny. I'll hurry up a little bit on this. Aside from a roadmap, plan segments of time and celebrate. So this is one of the things that we, coach in our accelerator is just, hey, you probably need more than a marketing guy. You need someone who's actually out there punting the message, helping people understand, et cetera. This is just known stuff. Losing network. Yeah, so just have an expectation from your community of what they want to expect from you, what value should be coming. That makes a really big difference, and of course we support those endeavors. Mitigate single points of failure, being conscious of availability. So today, when you build your own app chain, you get your own RPC endpoint, indexer, and explorer for free. We just throw that in, right? So that's $2 million cost for most new blockchains. There's always the question of who's pay for that? How is it going to be run? But the point of us doing that is to sort of take on that risk for the app chain. So we would hope very much that you guys would build your own tools, telemetry, everything, give you that out of the box to start so that it's easier to refer to that information and then go build your own. You know, if you want to lean on us the whole time, that's perfectly fine. You know, we're doing due diligence, we're a validator of last resort. You know, we're happy to support. The point is that we already take on some levels of centralization because that's part of our trust model. Provide, take advantage of that value. And that leads me to my last problem and point. Leverage centralization temporarily accompanied by transparency. Again, this is, I think, straightforward for most who've had a crypto talk before, is that you have to get a response from your audience, right? So one of the biggest problems in DAOs is that people just don't vote. They buy a token and say, oh, it's going to make me rich. I'm just going to sit on it, or I'll go lend it on a centralized exchange or something. It's relatively unproductive for DAOs. I spent a lot of time with the superhumans and the Umagrais, and their incentives are something that I really like. I'm a fan of their TVM concept person. It doesn't reflect our opinions of the Octopus Network, but the principles of, you know, understanding centralization as a decision-making mechanism, as a vote, as the sort of transparency that's required for that, it's borderline political. This is, you know, regular thought leader stuff. I'm not here to talk you guys down on this. You roughly know where you're coming in on this. So I think the most important components about this we've already discussed, but I left one on the table. Parachain epochs are in 48 weeks right now. So that would be the roadmap you're sort of planning around if you're going Polkadot. That's not us. If you get a lease with us, then you're with us until you want to sell your Oct tokens. So from the sense of planning a roadmap, planning time, that is much, much easier at Octopus Network by comparison. Okay, so after I introduce this slide, I think we're going to take a small intermission. I need to stop talking for a couple of minutes at least. So let's just cover these other things, what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so new components to cover. Again, we're not here to teach Substrate. I'm here to tell you guys what is different about Polkadot and Kusama versus Octopus Network, with a little bit of stuff sprinkled on top just to tease you guys, to hope that you'll want to be interested and try building a Substrate blockchain with us. So off-chain workers, we're going to talk about some capabilities there. That's something that's really, really useful to bind a both centralized and distributed resource to your validators. So if you could say, hey, I'm willing to take on this centralized risk, but distribute it amongst my validators, there's all kinds of benefits there. We're going to talk about that. ICS messages and IBC protocols. A lot of us have heard of Cosmos. A lot of us have not messed with the direct mechanics that make them so valuable. We're going to get into that. And again, we have a grant from the Interchain Foundation to develop a Substrate on, IBC messages on Substrate. So more about that later. That's one of the very important unique value points that we have, that you don't actually need to build a bridge with somebody else. We just need to agree on certain metadata values in order to exchange fungible tokens with them. So that's being right now by Astersheet and an injective protocol. Again, more on that later. Substrate 9.13 not higher. That means that we've just moved into the place where Frontier is a viable option. We're so glad to do that right before ETH Denver, because that means that you guys can bring your Solidity over to us. You can bring your Truffle Grafana solutions over to us. There's a really easy Open Zeppelin template that comes with the Frontier pallets for Substrate. So we'll get into that a little bit, and I will definitely recognize some weak points of my knowledge on that. I hope you guys will ask me questions that make me go learn. I will go learn for you and bring you that information this week. So again, just final thoughts on that. Substrate 9.13, not the newest version. We are not supporting Inkwasm at this time. We're waiting for XCMP and Inkwasm to be stable releases before we start looking for building with them. That's going to take some time, but as Polkadot refines the releases, we'll consider a timeline for that. There is no published timeline for that yet. Also, Octopus Network Pallets. We need to explain the frame that we use to put things together. That's the framework for runtime aggregation of modularized entities. We'll get into that. Basically, that's just, hey, we're putting multiple runtimes right up against each other. They have this usefulness via JSON RPC and some other things like that. So you're not totally out of the woods with Java and JSON, but again, the Octopus Network Pallets are the components that make us unique to Polkadot, to other versions of Substrate. So we're going to get into the functionality a little bit so you can understand what not to break when you're, sort of breaking the Barnacle template. We'll give you guys the Frontier Node template. We'll equip you guys and then go from there. So forgive me, I haven't spoken this long since 2020 Clubhouse. I don't know. So yeah, I need a lozenge and the rest for a minute, but let's take a brief intermission and then we'll come back. So let me see if I can post up the screen. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys. We'll begin again in 10 minutes. It's a restart time of what, 6 p.m. Central? Sorry, I've got clocks all over the place. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Let's give it 10 minutes. As the design is using the audio.
So you're doing the audio is fine, the slides are fine, but you're actually. It's, I think it's the Wi-Fi.
Okay, is this lightning power or is this not power?
This is not power. This is just on battery.
Okay, short of getting you power and heat from the computer, there's nothing we can do. I'd like to do that if you're up for it. I can give you some things, but I think that's all we can do is that Wi-Fi part.
This is a brand. So I'm just gonna try to change to
If you don't want to change it, then no disrespect, just whatever we got. That's
Yeah, I'm just trying to look at the viewers.
and the
Audio is perfect. Yeah, it's being
where's that capture? Is that capture or is that capture?
It's directly from.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, just test. Check, check. All right, we're going to get started in another 2 minutes on the second half of the Octopus Network presentation.
You listen to the same music I've been to.
A couple more minutes, we'll start right up. Get back on it. Thank you guys so much for being patient with me as I nurse my way through being in public. I'm quite the hermit. So it is a lot for me to speak on stage. I have not in quite a while. Y'all have made it excellent though. Thank you so much. So, forgive the cough dropped a little bit, but a little something. All right. So I'm going to keep repeating, obvious phrases because that's part of my talk. Sorry. We're not here to teach substrate. However, I am here to entice you to suggest that substrate is not just useful, but appealing, utility, blah, 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 flouncy words. So why would I do that? It's because of this. This diagram is the easiest way that I can explain that. It is a abundance of possibility, flexibility, tooling, and the important sort of initial point that I would highlight about this is RPC over API. Right. So there is all kinds of different components today that we API call with. There's different styles of building an API. I'm sure we've all used one where just like, oh, build this. Why am I sending you, a secondary key over and over again, and then making the same call? There's all kinds of silly things that just don't make sense. And goodness knows I've seen them in Fortune 500 companies, and not just in startups. So the simplicity level that we're looking at here, not just for off-chain workers, but in general, because we're kind of starting with this substrate node just framework, right, is RPC. Now, yes, you'll see APIs here too. It is still possible. It's still usable. That's not my purpose for motivating you to use substrate. If you want APIs, yes, they're very rich and wonderful APIs that you can host yourself. That's one of the diagrams that you'll see for Octopus Network, where it's specifically saying, hey, here's your opportunity to run a validator, here's your opportunity to run a node. You can run services that are not actually part of block production. You can say, hey, please supervise block production and then inject messages over here, or participate with something like being a fisherman, reviewer of transactions, etc. So again, not here to teach substrate, forgive me, but had to dig into some mechanics there. So RPC calls are really flexible and useful by default. We encourage them in JSON. That's the sort of like de facto method. Of course, there's components out of the box by default that are restricted. So if you make RPC calls to your own loopback, yeah, you can say do this about anything. But consensus things, key rotation, session ID, different components, and little, maybe not metadata, but important components of chain connectivity, telemetry. You should only be able to do them through the local host itself. So it's kind of like the the premise of not using local root, but also needing the permissions of local root. You want to segment that, right? So you should never be making root calls of RPC to your substrate node. Please don't do that. You're asking for trouble. Again, to reiterate, .ksm is flagship substrate. We are the stable and older version of substrate, and we increase the features there. We build value there. We're very happy to be part of the substrate ecosystem in that way. We do serve a different purpose than .ksm. If you're just coming to this talk, you've already heard me say that too many times. Primary mechanisms for use. So this is just raw, easy ways to go about it. HTTP calls to use off-chain workers over here to that secondary compute stack. You can get an entropy source, a random number generator. That's really useful if you wanted to use like an HSM and have that as a hardware requirement. There's no reason why you can't say, hey, you have to have this corporate product in order to be a validator. On the one hand, we might discourage that because it's a little unfair and it's a high cost, but hey, some validators are going to pop up on Octopus Network and say, hey, you need to put down a lot of money to participate in our network. And we'll be very happy for them to appear and do that, but also there's going to be a little friction. Local time is another really useful one. Time observed by the chain is what you're going to get as timestamp on blocks produced by your validator. So that's useful data to have, but also if you ever have a memory leak, or the validator's catching up again after being offline for a short period, you might not want to rely on those timestamps from the validator itself. You might want a different compute and adjacent system to say, okay, here's precision time. Even if you're not doing PPTP, here's precision time. We know exactly when this block was made. And just for anyone who's not familiar, block times in substrate are frequently 6 seconds. They can be dynamic, but 6 seconds is pretty quick. The finality for that time is much longer. That's a long story. Again, we're not here to teach substrate. Moving along. A secondary database for keys is a really useful off-chain worker component. You're going to see people use this in different avenues. I've not seen someone set up a really fat RAM requirement, like you have to have a terabyte of RAM or something like that. But the premise of using RAM or ROM is really just the, the latency of that response, the size of that database, the ability to parse different components in that, that data structure, however you want it to be. I would probably recommend, rotating key stores for anything that you're putting in RAM. Don't ask people to store gigs and gigs and gigs of keys in RAM. Just try to make that relatively scalable. And if not, then you got to Merkle tree that stuff out. We're not really getting into ML here, but hey, if you're comfortable with a verbal mount range every now and then, it's pretty easy to manage one of those tables and say, okay, here's a bunch of values. You can see them with roughly just this hash. Please refer to the table and stuff like this. So that's very useful. Access to local keys stored. So you can, if you want, separate key ownership completely and not just say, okay, you could say, hey, the validator is not supposed to be holding these keys for whatever reason. I want the off-chain worker to hold these keys. This is something I actually haven't seen used yet, but that's why I'm mentioning it. I want to see you all come up with some interesting stuff. You could be delegating key powers to different types of operators. You could be delegating key powers to people who are not validators. Flexibility there. There's, of course, a sleep no op command that you can send to the off-chain worker. That's pretty important to say, hey, shut up, stop wasting money on my cloud budget right now. Hey, I know you're going to keep trying over and over again to run this extra telemetry. I don't care if you want to update Ubuntu right now, just shush. So sleep no op commands are definitely going to be useful. That's one component. And they can also submit transactions. That's kind of an interesting one. From Ethereum, there's really not a comparable mechanism that I can mention except really layer 2s or by having a third-party console kind of like Zero. The submitting of transactions by an off-chain worker on Substrate means that you have a lot of different opportunity to say, okay, a transaction is going to be initiated because of something that's not happening on chain. So that's not right, but because off-chain workers can HTTP calls or have their own HTTP schema, hell, you could be running an Apache server on that thing that pulls from another source. Because of that, you can say, okay, this is not an oracle, but this is an external trigger. Something from this overly simplified web page that I could just get raw text from, that I can parse. Okay, I see that MSN has posted the keyword Bitcoin. I'm now going to, because MSN is talking about Bitcoin again. I don't know. That's kind of a jank and lousy use case, but hey, Bitcoin price is a very common one. I believe the Shiny template helps you do that. If you're looking around on GitHub, Shiny Substrate, I believe that's the default that it comes with. It's like, hey, you can plug in Bitcoin price here and do some averages on different feeds for different exchanges. So that's a common use case. Because I'm really an infrastructure engineer by passion, I have to mention one other component that I think is really useful to think about. Infrastructure engineer is a terrible title, but you're that person. I'm not going into that in this talk. There's a mutex lock that you can use to queue up segments of RAM and say, hey, when this sector of RAM is full, you may not enter a new value until it is out. So it's not just first in, first out. You can basically set up a queue that exists at your validator that will specifically not overload your off-chain worker. So if you're pushing things or you're pulling from the chain to the off-chain worker because you create some external trigger for that reason, that's a great place to use a mutex lock to say, okay, one user once per minute is allowed to do this, or one validator, once per second is allowed to do this. You can very easily choose and say, okay, once a value is in this sector of RAM, you cannot put another one until that is zeroed out. So very important for resource management there. Nobody likes throwing up a off-chain worker lab and then just watching the cloud bill go crazy. That's not, we don't want that. No. And again, we are not here to teach Substrate. So notice on the bottom left-hand corner of this image, we're showing the link for substrate.dev. It may redirect you to substrate.io in a couple of different places, but please go there and look at this diagram. There's going to be a lot of really helpful information there. Don't get me wrong, Polkadot Wiki is also great, but if you're learning Substrate, you can learn how Polkadot does it, and you can learn the underlying, hey, this is how Substrate is pretty much always going to function, or works in current versions, etc. So again, just encouraged to go find this diagram on substrate.dev and consider the Polkadot Wiki as an auxiliary component. We just covered a lot of things. Anybody want to ask a question? We still have a mic up front, if there's anyone. No? Once, twice? Okay. There is no expiration for questions because I've got another 40 minutes where I am here for y'all, so let's keep going. Okay, so likes Comic Sans. I hope that's what this font is. But here's a really critical explanation about a feature on our software. Substrate for IBC is something, again, that we were given to develop. The Interchain Foundation, one of the Web 2 entities behind Cosmos, they gave us the grant to do this. This work was effectively completed January 6th of this year. We're very proud of it. It is going into production right now. So part of this is already in demo. You can see it not in prod, but in testnet, that it is working between Substrate and Cosmos, that you can exchange IBC messages. So what does that mean? It means that you can send different types of ICS messages back and forth that enable the transfer of fungible assets across different blockchains. That doesn't have to be a Cosmos chain. That doesn't have to be a Cosmos node. That's just the easiest place for that to today. So the easiest to describe this diagram you got is kind of like a different and more tedious TLS handshake, TCP handshake, DHCP door handshake. It's very similar in the way of low-level protocols that some of us have worked with at our day job before. So that's sort of like, hey, I have an argument to this. Oh, you're this person. Okay, acknowledge packet. Okay, reply. Now we have, not a consensus, but we have either a channel open or we have an agreed communicate in this way. Okay, cool. So now we have a channel open. Let's talk about, virtual path and channel that goes inside that channel. I can't help it. I see this as a WAN engineer because that's what my background comes from, is network security engineering at scale. But even if you don't come from the land where TCP and UDP was your day-to-day troubleshooting, if you look at the diagram, what you can see is a handshake flow that starts a channel, agrees on some metadata values, and then starts exchanging information. So just one last homage to traditional IT VPN setup. If you've ever had to sit there and go, hey, what's your Diffie-Hellman groups? And hey, are you turning on this anti-replay thing on your firewall or SSL terminating point, whatever? It's very similar to that. It's not so much that you need your values to match up exactly, it's that you need to communicate with each other and agree, hey, these are the values that we're using, right? So most important sort of like keyword or string to look up for this is ICS-10, the grandpa client. So ICS 2, 3, 4, 5, 18, 25, and 26. You're going to see this listed on our GitHub. You don't have to memorize those numbers. Those are the interchain messages that we have built into this concept, the IBC.RS package that you'll see on our GitHub. That is how this functions. If you look on Cosmos's GitHub, you'll see that the grandpa client, ICS-10, it's in draft, okay? Like I said, it has been completed on testnet, not complete in production yet. So until we have a burn-in period in production, we're not calling that candidate, we're not calling it sanctioned. We're saying, hey, this is great experimental code, it needs to be validated in production, it's already gone through some scrutiny, it needs to be confirmed. So the reason that I issue these disclaimers and talk about this like UDP is because part of the initiation of the handshake is a little bit fumbling. If you watch the demo video, you'll notice that there's sometimes more than one message that says, hello, I'm here, connect with me. It's like an awareness packet or an ACK packet, even if it's an ACK back or it's a forward, SYN-ACK at once. If you look at any of those messages, you'll see that some of them repeat sometimes because this is a stateful protocol that operates over traditional networks that has to function in the time spec of a blockchain, where one blockchain has different time than the other. Sorry, not a blockchain, two blockchains, right? Between two different infrastructures, they both have their own time schema. Hey, maybe I have 6-second blocks. Maybe I have 10-minute blocks. God, the difference is something you have to plan for and anticipate. That means you're going to see retries. Okay, hey, try again, try again. Oh, do you see me now? Okay, yeah, I see you now. So this is just, fair expectation set. I'm a huge fan of this work. This is part of the first thing that I noticed when I learned about Octopus Network before I joined the team last year. like, wow, this is really cool. I understand it's not perfect and it's going to be messy in the beginning because there's no other way, but it does work. So very interesting how that functions to sort of, receive, ingest, and wait for messages. There's a lot of fault tolerance, right? Once you open the channel, once the communication is established and standardized, the fault tolerance decreases significantly. If you're breaking and reestablishing an IBC channel, you should expect some problems. Once you put up an IBC channel, you want to keep passing fungible assets through that as long as there is a pool of adjacent value to move. That doesn't mean that you necessarily need liquidity, but it's recommended to make the experience smooth and easy for users. So again, if you want to look up information about this and see proof is in the pudding that we're not just saying this, that we are actually on Cosmos's GitHub, right? You can go to github.com/cosmos/IBC. And on that web page, you'll see ICS-10 is the grandpa client. That links back to our repo on GitHub. That's just very transparently and straightforward. That's us, right? Excuse me. So the important thing to know about this whole schema is that we know IBC really well. We've done lots of different things in getting this set up. And you'll notice on our roadmap that is not the end of this development. Something else we're also working on is IBC between Near Protocol and us, and also Near Protocol and Polkadot. So our idea of using this structure, this protocol IBC, is not to say, hey, come use an app chain. This is the only way you can get this benefit. No. We want to share this benefit with everyone. We're not a stranglehold on our value kind of project. We're a share the love kind of project. So it's very important for us to make sure that we're telling people like, hey, this is functionality that we're building in app chains, but if you end up not building an app chain, we still want functionality over time because it's good for everybody. There is also a capability, where is this? That's separate. Okay, sorry, I mixed up my notes a little bit. We can keep moving along with that. Again, important underlying principle that I just whiz past really fast. This stand-up does not require a zone or a hub. This is a protocol level chain-to-chain exchange of fungible tokens based on pre-agreed metadata and a channel to make that exchange possible. It's basically a bind based on the agreement of that metadata, which we recommend, involving some, not necessarily third-party trust, but some being transparent, public trust, right? If I'm agreeing that my metadata with injected protocol should be 600,522, I don't know, 6522 or something, then they should also agree with that, and it shouldn't be a private decision that is agreed upon. That should be public knowledge. So moving along, let's talk a little bit more about other components that we like. Yep, okay. So, I took a little longer than I was supposed to. Okay, let me hurry up. So, just straightforward, this is the main logic to keep in mind with Substrate. This is the part where I say I'm not teaching Substrate, I'm basically teaching Substrate. It's important to understand that this is why we like Substrate so much. This is one of the reasons, is that you get forkless upgrades. When you modify a contract today, you get all types of weird headaches. You need to, you're now out of audit, like, oh, hey, the last version was audited. We only changed a little piece of information. Well, that still undermines public trust. It's hard for people who don't understand smart contracts to say, oh, look, they just fixed some things. Oh, no, it's a different contract now. I can see this little hash. I know it's different. There's all kinds of confusion that exists on ETH that is really very transparent, and users just don't see it on Substrate. So we bring that benefit to you guys the same way that Polkadot Kusama does. It's important to note that that means that you will occasionally be asked to upgrade your Substrate version. So this just happened to our existing two app chains. I don't think anybody noticed. We didn't make an announcement about it because there was no need or benefit. So when both of our first app chains launched, they were Substrate version 9.12. There was no for their economies. There was a very brief bit of downtime for the bridge, and then 9.13. So very, very different process from forking a token, modifying a smart contract, modifying a schema of smart contracts, modifying a deployer contract. Very different to just say, okay, I have a new runtime that I want to incorporate, or I want to modify the existing runtime. Let me just plug that in. So that is a lot easier of a modification process. And some people like that future-proofing because it's a different level of flexibility. The community shows up and says, hey, fix this right now. Different, different values, different costs, different risks to think about doing that on Ethereum. Much, much easier to quickly say, okay, guys, we're not redeploying the token. Just bear with us for a minute. We're running the upgrade. Okay, and now the upgrade is done. So really, really nice to have for this upgrade. Thank you again very much, Very Inc., for that wonderful concept that we enjoy. So again, to be clear, you may be asked to upgrade your version of Substrate. It's not a real pain. Substrate version. Okay. We'll come back to Octopus Pallets at the end of this slide. NFTs are something that we've been asked about a lot recently. We are working on NFT bridging. We're not a lot of different protocols are doing that well, but the sort of mint and destroy solution is pretty common for bridging everywhere. That's pretty much the option that we're pursuing at this time. Is that okay? You have to acknowledge that the original metadata and media components of your NFT now needs to be moved to another chain. So that means it can't exist on the chain where it lives today. So that's a really complicated process, and there's a lot of different values for trust that go into that. So we want to really take our time. That's really innovative stuff. That's coming out soon. Not available today, but the two app chains that are launching in the near future, one of which is in audit right now, they both need this technology to help their economies be portable enough for the connection to near to be useful. We talked about near protocol, fungible assets moving back and forth. Pretty easy argument to make there. They're like, hey, 2-second finality DeFi on a separate layer one, where there's so many other projects hanging out. Like, for sure, that makes sense. But also getting NFTs back and forward between, there's a significant amount of value there. It can't just be fractionalized versions of that. It can't just be fungible versions of that. Non-fungible assets need to be able to move across. So if you're interested in non-fungible token bridging, please stay in touch with us about that. I need to put out an update on that, but we will be very happy to announce some progress in the future on that. Octopus Pallets is an important component for us to touch on also. What's the mouse? Thank you. Okay. So again, I said this acronym really, really fast before. Framework for runtime aggregation of modularized entities, right? That's frame. You'll see that listed in Substrate documentation. That's a very polished way of saying you can have multiple runtimes in one stack together. They can interoperate, they can be separate, you can have duplicates of them. It's really very, very flexible. So Substrate is not a Java protocol, but there is still lots of components for Java. For instance, JSON RPC is the most convenient method to call back to yourself. So there are components to be aware of there. And it's not just Java runtimes, but of course there's other flexibility as well. The point of the frame structure is that you can have runtimes come in and out. That's how the forkless upgrading is possible. Okay, Octopus Pallets. So what are pallets? Pallets are software modules that allow you to do things that weren't already programmed into the stack. The reason that's interesting for us is because we built in some of our own homemade things. A lot of these things have already communicated to you about. This is just how they are integrated into our stack. So again, this is Substrate, and we bolt on our value and then correlate all of our value prop to that. So that's why least proof of stake is our economic method. That's why we offer so much with off-chain archiving and the accelerator and all these other things. So happy to focus on that again in just a moment. We'll sum that on the next slide. So just to be transparent, there's really 4 different pallets. There's a support pallet, the upward messages pallet, the LPOS pallet, and the app chain pallet. This is just stuff that I'm explaining to you guys so you'll know what it is when you see it around. You don't need to tweak these things super much, but keep an eye out for them. The support palette is really just common code. It's stuff that you need to, have the validator network and the support infrastructure set up correctly. There's a pre-assigned schema for app chain metadata and some other components. So the support one almost nothing to do there, just common code put in by us. The upward messages component is from app chains up to near protocol. So that upward is up to near protocol, right? So that is a unidirectional palette that is designed to take substrate consensus and push those messages to near protocol in time with near finality. So if you ask me, that's a hell of a hat trick where substrate block times are closer to 6 seconds with extended finality over time, and near protocol is finality in 2 seconds. So that's an interesting dance that we do, right? So it's very, very efficient, and I have not seen a faster bridge yet, short of liquidity shuffles, right? Everybody knows you can drop something into somebody's wallet. That's nice and easy, but short of that, the bridging that our team builds is the fastest that I've seen in person, and we can thank Near Protocol for that. So the LPOS palette, that's where you get the least proof of stake schema. So least proof of stake is just where we separate ourselves from NPOS on the Polkadot side. It's critical to understand that this is the way our economy works, in that we do not require ownership of governance tokens repeatedly. We don't require repeated auctions. If you make it onto the network once, you put up that value once, you encourage others to put up that value, that initial 11 validators goes up with a minimum 10,000 OCT each. There's not a need to re-elect or to re-get that value. So that's the important thing with least proof of stake. That configuration is in this structure that's in our palette that we pre-built for you. It's in our Barnacle template, and you're basically using it whether you like it or not. The majority of the custom configuration that really makes our project special is in the app chain palette. If you want to rip apart our solution and really get to know the guts, that's how I would go about it. That's like, hey, if I was actually a substrate engineer and I was curious about the pallets, that's where I would be looking, because that's where you start seeing things about weight systems and how the bridging is supposed to work. Really, the near to app chain transfers are there. So remember, the upward messages palette is from substrate, application specific blockchains up to near, and then the app chain palette is down from near to those application specific blockchains. So that's really critical. That palette also manages cross-chain assets. So that means that it is both the orchestrator and sort of the pusher in that bridging operation. So obviously these pallets all have to act in concert for bridging to make sense. But how often do we bridge simultaneously in one direction? We never do. It's unidirectional, and transaction finalizes. Okay, fine. I want to go back across the bridge. So be it. One of the really interesting and unique things that I wish this gentleman who I just spoke to earlier would know. Oh, he's still here. Okay, cool. Yeah, one of the interesting things that we'll be telling folks about in this palette that's super useful is pushing off-chain worker messages up to near protocol. So that's a really unique component of Octopus Network. And let me just explain what that means, is that your off-chain worker, the sort of sidebar component to your validator, that thing can push transactions onto your substrate blockchain, your application-specific substrate chain, but also up to near. So if you need to automatically manage DeFi, if you need to post the creation of a new token because you're a creator economy, then you have the ability to do that without demanding resources directly from block production, directly from fishermen. So you can have a sort of sidelined entity that says, hey, my responsibility is to push these really important things up to near protocol. So that's something that a lot of chains struggle with, the idea that you could have a client that is on a secondary chain push messages to that chain, which are then useful. Like yes, I can use a Litecoin call right now and enter on somebody else's blockchain some little text. Is that going to be useful for them at all? No, probably not. Light clients are great, but if you can't use it, what's the point? So again, off-chain workers can communicate up to near through the app chain palette. That's really cool. It's also super slept on. There will be more to do with that in the future. I'm running, keep moving. Okay, I give this right? Yeah, okay, cool. So, Substrate by itself is great. Why do people build with Substrate? To get the other stuff to build with it, right? When you're developing on Ethereum, you're developing because you're looking for certain things that are there. You know the tech stack. Okay, this is layer one. All right, smart contract schema. Okay, I only have so many variables I can use. There's only so many calls and functions I can use. Okay, fine. The modularized nature of Substrate makes it really easy to pull in other components. We integrate with a few of them that are really, really excellent. IPFS, React, Chainlink, Integrity Solution, Kive, and others are probably the top that I'll recommend here. I'll just talk about them really briefly, and I'll fully admit that there is more homework that I need to do on these things. So if you're looking at the very top link, top links, plural actually, that would be a Rust and Substrate schema for IPFS. That's actually not an off-chain worker that's built in a Substrate. So that's really helpful for dealing with Substrate's off-chain workers when you want to orchestrate IPFS, when you want to use IPLD, different types of interplanetary something or other. Super useful to say, okay, I don't have to build my own off-chain worker that makes HTTP calls to somebody else's network. I'm just, okay, I know this is the IPFS schema platform, system that I want to use, whether it's, actually linked or whatever, doesn't matter. That is an initial tool set that you can use to get started, and it works directly and is designed directly to work with the one built by Rust. So that's what those two links are right there. You'll notice that's the Rust IPFS link and also off-chain IPFS. So it is not quite the same complexity as an off-chain worker. It's basically built for you. A really easy way to start IPFS there on Substrate, though I'm not making it sound easy. I'll admit I fumbled that a little. So React is also the de facto front end that you'll want to use for Substrate. There is plenty of other things to use. Goodness knows we have GameFi app chains with us that are working on other solutions. There's Near, there's EVM, there's Java. Like you can use Ruby on Rails. I don't care. There's all kinds of flexibility that can be used. But React is the default, most easy to integrate. Just, hey, here's the front end, here's a template, a bunch of stuff that's pre-built. We highly recommend building in React if you're going to be working on the Substrate concept. This is one of the things that I feel is like a pretty significantly different skill set. A lot of us work on interesting infrastructure and, like math and science and technology, but we're not the UX guys. That's definitely some of us. So that would be the place where you might want to consider somebody else owning that, but I know there's there's always some super coders around. If you need somebody to own React and you're not capable of owning React, that's something that we can help you network with folks about. Like the idea that you bring us a good concept and we help you make it a reality. We can talk about Octopus Venture DAO all day. A big pile of money does not bring you the help that you need, right? We know that it's part of the equation, but you can't just buy somebody wanting to work. You have to go out there and recruit. You have to incentivize. You have to make it worthwhile for someone to work with you. So we have a recruiting partnership and some other relationships to help with that. Just devs in the industry, communications across the parity ecosystem and across Near protocol as well, the guilds. So very grateful for support from the Polkadot community and Near community that we're growing the economy for everyone. Right? So they're happy to work with us for that reason. A little bit of a tangent, but we can get you some help. React is the easiest thing moving along. Chainlink has a pre-built solution. We did not build this. We were granted to build Chainlink solution for Solana. You'll notice that Chainlink is coming to Near protocol in the immediate future. We hope that they're going to resolve a whole bunch of Oracle sort of problems and lacks that Near has today. It's not that Near is doing something wrong. It's that the RPC network and API network is in a growing phase right now, and we're very proud of Near's Nightshade progress. Near is one of the only successfully started blockchains in production that doesn't have the headaches that ZIL and ETH2 and a whole bunch of other systems have. Being so excitable about infrastructure, obviously I care a lot about sharding. Ask me about that in my spare time. I can't focus on that too much for this talk, and we'll run out of time. So yeah, I think we all know what Chainlink is, just to give a quick exposition for the audience. If you need centralized data feeds, but you need them in a distributed and trustful manner, you end up paying Chainlink oracles to bring you data. That's basically it. That schema does not change in this positioning. It's just a different integration, and Substrate already has that built, makes it relatively easy. There's lots of different benefits to other oracles. Goodness knows we're talking to lots of different Oracle protocols, but that one is pre-built. So if you're looking for oracles today and you're okay with a degree of centralization, under the caveat of chain links politics, totally understand. That makes sense for a lot of people in the stack. So earlier on, I spoke about really high hardware requirements, about having a terabyte of NVMe or some other, kind of expensive cloud resource, right? So integrity is probably my favorite example of that. And instead of asking you to provide that, they provide it for you. So integrity is the concept that Intel XGX blessed in partnership with, and that basically means that integrity is an orchestration service for an Intel XGX cloud. Does that actually mean anything? No, that's a bunch of buzzwords, but the premise of it is that you can use a verifiably secure hardware enclave to do things in a powerful server on a computer that you don't own or control, where you know for a fact that you're not being captured, debugged. There's nobody like plugging in little UART pins and trying to pick out your stuff. No self-respecting manufacturer puts UART pins on a motherboard in accessible fashion today. But bottom line, integrity's purpose is a really interesting use case of off-chain workers for substrate, where the off-chain worker is actually an orchestrator for another layer off-chain, which is this highly centralized compute enclave, where you can remotely send a message and say, okay, Intel XGX server, are you actually working on the workload that I told you to work on before? Has anybody tampered with this? You send a special message to it, it replies back and says, nope, hardware stack is secure all the way down to the processor. Nobody can see this except you. It's a very valuable concept. Kilt is probably the first one that I would compare with, and that is worth paying attention to. Kilt's product is still under development, and we'll be really excited to show off their technology with DeBio. That's the first app chain. We're using that as Pandu is using that as a, she's not there, sorry, I thought I saw her. Pandu's project DeBio is using that as a mechanism for not private Oracle services, but private off-chain data integrity and data validation. So the way that Integrity Solution does that is an example of how tough you could be on hardware requirements for off-chain workers, because goodness knows the Integrity network isn't completely run by them. There's people who come volunteer and participate. They willingly give up their Intel SGX resource to the network in exchange for their tokens. So Kilt is a really valuable alternative to this, and is a little bit easier to digest for some of us who aren't so obsessed with hardware and weird proprietary protocols. So keep an eye out for their solution for that as well. Crust and Kive are also two very important names in the Polkadot ecosystem to be familiar with for the service, where you can have sort of a mixnet of IPFS links, and that's really just a obfuscated little IPLD. Oh, hey, you have to link from one, link to the other, link to the other. So it's different levels of permissioning for different benefits when browsing for a file that's decentralized. Real smooth sentence there, right? So let me focus on our partner Kive for a moment, because that's a really, really important stack component. We encourage you guys to use Kive. We encourage you to take a look at their solution, because it is orchestration for Arweave. IPFS is really nice, and it is a protocol, not a platform. So you choose and control what you do. But also, some people don't want to design down to the granular level. They just want that plug and play. They want the easy button. So if you're looking for an easy button and you're willing to pay for it, Kive is a really good opportunity for that, because you can write in 1 GB chunks on Arweave. Why do I mention them here? Besides that they have a partnership with us, the purpose of that partnership is to copy off-chain data. So this tool is a work in progress. We're still working on this with Kive. We were hoping to have this at mainnet launch, but Kive and us, we have different sprints and different targets. So the goal on the roadmap that you'll see is that we will have off-chain archiving. So that means that when you want to leave Octopus Network, you don't have to stay bound to the status quo. You've got a copy somewhere completely unrelated to us that we can't stop, literally. Arweave, it's going to be there forever, that you can always reference as a sort of checkpoint of the chain. So it's really useful for a number of reasons. Number one, you can tell people, hey, you don't need a live copy of the chain for this locally. You can read this remotely, right? The same way that a beacon chain on ETH2, or the same way that some other service will say, okay, I don't need to hold this data locally. I just need to read it. that's a really useful thing for restarting a network of validators. You don't have to start with the, 1,000 gigabyte blockchain that you already had. You just read it somewhere else when you need it. And then, okay, here's the new chain that we're starting. So it's a cost saving mechanism. It's a point of displaced trust. It makes it really easy to leave our ecosystem, which we encourage, so that you can do something like become your own Polkadot ecosystem, your own substrate ecosystem, or to join Polkadot or to join Kusama. So this is part of the reason why we're so well positioned with our, simultaneous partner and competitor, because they know that we're sending them business, right? So it's just very straightforward that Polkadot's utility increases because we incubate Web3 without being incubators. We don't actually own equity in those platforms. We just make sure that their value continues to grow and then help them, mature. So we're very happy to do that. That's our whole purpose for existing. We do not debase our token to this purpose more than we've already planned, but also this is the reason why we do what we do. So one last little component that might be cool to read about. I think the Integrity Network book is really interesting if you're an infrastructure nerd like me and you want to read about some terribly proprietary stuff. But if you're a little bit more interested in flexibility for the front end, Soramitsu built Fearless Utils. It is on a newer version of Substrate than we utilize, so watch out for compatibility problems. But Fearless Utils will save you a lot of time if you're developing for a mobile app. So just, I'm trying to condense and take the effort and the time out of it for you guys. So keep an eye out for Fearless Utils if you're going Android, if you're going iOS. That stuff is in Kotlin and Swift. So again, we will help you recruit if you need help recruiting, but keep an eye out for that stuff, very useful. Let's move to our last few slides, and now I really got to pick up the pace.
Okay.
Okay, how can I start building an app chain? So the simple answer is what I've been saying all day. We don't teach Substrate. We're not reinventing Substrate. We're borrowing a stable version and improving on it. So that means that your tools for Substrate already exist today. That's them right there. The Frontier node template is really what I'm assuming most people in this room want. The purpose of Frontier is to give you an EVM opportunity. If you've got your .sol and other files from Truffle, then it's pretty much just plug and play. There's a little bit of integration work to go through. I'm a little short on the details there, but if you come to me, I'm going to end up learning it for you. So feel free to lean on me about stuff that's not easy. It's my job to make things easier. I'm just always trying to do it for different people. So again, look at that Frontier node template and be aware that there is an issue marked on that one with off-chain workers. So we can talk about off-chain workers. It would be kind of unfortunate for someone to go show up with their dream and then just go error. So for that reason, be aware that the template for Frontier has been moved, the current one. So this is sort of considered the stable one. It's known to have some OCW problems. Just be ready for that. As we know, Substrate's a work in progress. This is part of the dynamics of us moving on to 9.13. We wanted to be on the stable version, but also Substrate is still very, very new. And while Substrate has moved on from version 9.13, there's always going to be things to perfect. I think we've always, I think all of us in this room have been aware of at one point a software library that's not from this year that needs some updates for this year, right? So, excuse me. Also, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Prometheus, but if you want to get into interesting telemetry and how to sort of make people aware about very light and small fast transactions on your network, Prometheus is a really useful way to do that. You can do different things with Grafana that are nice and useful for analytics, but Grafana is kind of bulky and a pain, in my opinion. But I don't know. I also like command line way too much, so don't listen to me. It's a nice visualizer. Main theme of this slide, again, just before we go to the next, is if you want to get started, grab the Frontier node template. If problems with off-chain workers, watch out for that issue in the repo, and then grab this other version. If you're not going EVM, you're going to want that row on the bottom. That's the regular Substrate node template. You're really just, when you're working with us, you're doing that on version 9.13 with the Octopus Pallets. You don't have to add them manually. The keyword to know here is barnacle, right? So that's our testnet template. That is kept up to date. If you grab the barnacle today, I believe it has the EVM components that you need, but we're not asking you guys to show up over here and remodularize their template. We just need you to know what it looks like, what's the base level. Okay, Octopus is only adding these 4 things, not that different. And now we're getting close to the end of our talk. So we just covered a whole heck of a lot. I wish I could cover more. I wish I had more downtime this week to cover even more juicy details that I like about our project and about the way we use Substrate and about Substrate in general and just what's possible. But we had to cram this in a short period of time, and I need my voice for the rest of the week. So let's just go through a couple of really quick things because everybody likes a reverse engineer helping them skip through the pain points, right? So reverse engineer's secret weapon is being dumb. Hit me with the 2 thumbs. So make sure you grab that link up top there. That's a no-code tool that's really, really handy. It's not going to no-code you and then just be like, oh, one-click Octopus network. But that is a possibility in the future, something we'd like to look at and discuss with MVP. But the benefit there is pretty obvious. You can go to a no-code tool, click a couple of different types of palettes and say, okay, I want this, like you're punching in a menu, just, I don't know, ordering a burger, whatever. Very easy stuff. So no-code tool, super great. Use my stupidity to your benefit. Hack something this week. Ask us questions about it. And also, there is this other component. Yeah, okay, so there's the link for the barnacle. If you want a quick and dirty hack, how to get through using the barnacle, where to plug things in, how to engage, this link above here is going to be really, really helpful. The fractional cost component is not something you need to dig into super much, but that link, the second one from the bottom, combined with barnacle, that's really the majority of what you need to sort of start dealing with components that will need modification. Not just picking out runtimes that you want, but configuring those runtimes to point to other resources to say, okay, this is the Solidity file that I'm working with. Please reference this. Okay, there's this function that wasn't parsed. Let me go back. Basic kind of compatibility work. So there's really only one other thing that I want to tell you just up front, and that's if you haven't played with Rust before, be aware of cargo. When you look at these GitHub repos, you're going to see cargo all over the place. Cargo is a package management tool in Rust. So it's not that different from Git, but there is some, I don't know, bad comparison. I'm not developed, don't listen to me. The bottom line is that you're going to see in cargo high-level details about what you need to know for compatibility, for pallets, for other components. So if you go look at any of the repos for our pallets, for other components for Substrate, and you click on that cargo file, you'll see links to other references so you can know what's going into it. Me as an infrastructure engineer, when I get a piece of hardware, I get it, I rip it open, I'm like, okay, follow the path, okay, here's FPGAs, here's some separate processing, here's flash, here's ROM, here's controllers. I need to rip things apart to understand them. So that is a way that I recommend going about that, because it's just easier and faster. So we now have 5 minutes left. So I'll just say this, there's really a lot that you can do. Me formerly being a composer and a musician, looking at this myself, I really look at it and think, damn, that's a lot of possibility. It's almost like an uncomfortable level of possibility. There's so much that can be done. If you have an idea, if you have a concept, you don't have to completely flesh it out. I would encourage you war game your economy before you get too deep into, okay, I'm building this function, okay, publish this, reference this, call this. It's much, much easier if you war game your economy first. I highly recommend that. Red team the heck out of your ideas, pen test each other's bullshit meter, if you will, and just be patient because economies like this are real complicated. The main logic behind us as a project, besides being the multi-chain network that we are, is to help people get started, and having a sustainable economic model, that's the real way that gets easy. So we have a microphone up here. We've got very little time left before the next speaker, so I don't know if they're wedged right up against us. Okay, we have time for 3 or less questions. Stump the chump, anyone? Anyone want to give me a difficult question? Anyone's welcome to ask me that kind of like, hey, don't you know? I'll take it. Any questions? Adam, I did not say questions on Twitter at any point. I forgot. Okay. Do you see any interesting responses that we could give the feed? Okay. Sure. Would you come to the mic? Oh, well, soon as you lose, sorry.
Howdy.
Howdy.
How you doing?
I'm parched, but I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. Good day to be alive, yeah.
Oh, sorry, say again?
Good day to be alive, yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes, just another one.
I'm great. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about NFT bridging. I'm a little bit into that space. I'm really curious on how you use this with that.
Yes, so NFT bridging is a critical part of our ecosystem. We were starting to prepare for this last year. We've had quite a few interested parties that are very NFT heavy economies. And there are things from this that we're borrowing from Polkadot, right? This is not completely original work on our part, but the components of the Beefy module, so that's, I'm forgetting the acronym right now, but the Beefy module from Substrate, when you're configuring that for bridging purposes, that's really your base layer of where you start putting settings together. If you're assigning an identifier to something that already has something like a non-fungible token, it sounds a little silly to tokenize a token ID, right? But that's effectively the starting point of that connection. It's not very different from the way a fungible asset works in IBC. You just have to have a different compute boundary for the number of IDs. So if you have a, what is it? Is it 8-bit compute boundary? Then even with overload or overflow, there's only so far you can go. There's a limit of what, 65, 545? And there's only so many identifiers that you can't associate with NFTs. So the idea is there has to be a big enough string that can be diverse enough for however many thousands or millions or hundreds of millions of NFTs they're going to cross that bridge. So it starts with retokenizing the asset and then saying, okay, here's the contents of this asset. That content needs to stop existing on the chain where it lives now and to start existing on the new chain. So this might mean that we require certain, standards for data management because they have to be able to plug into our bridge. But we haven't published anything firm on that yet, so that's still up in the air. The thing that we have confirmed so far that will be in the style of destroy, mint and destroy, which is once you mint the asset on the new chain and it's verified, the old asset, which was locked up, none of that funny hey, just in time, none of that. Now that that asset is locked up and we know it actually belongs to the other chain, okay, it's safely arrived at the other chain, okay, affirm that it's there, then destroy the other asset, mark it as dead, burn wallet, poison it, whatever. There's lots of silly ways to go about that, but they're all pretty straightforward. The token is no longer usable. If someone presented it, it would be, oh, okay, here's this, giant 0 hex with it, or here's like FFFFFF with it, right? So the idea is to kill the real one. And then, what is it, that movie, The Prestige? Is that, yeah? Like he kills himself and then the new version of him comes on stage the next night, every night, like that. So that's roughly the schema. Thank you for asking.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great question. We'll be excited to give you updates on that in the future. And it's a hard time. We got to cut. So thank you guys so much for your questions. Please, if you'd like to ask anything else, just come find us. We'll be around. Thank you so much for paying attention to our presentation. Enjoy your session.